It all started from an art forum issue in the mid-80s that Denise Miyagi covered, and that really intrigued me, trying to relate fashion with art. We put together the fashion collection. It was a kind of an original idea, not to try and mix art and fashion, but to keep them kind of separate. So the idea is to choose a curator every year. You ask him to choose 5 pieces, then interpret them with his or her art.
I sort of entered into the equation when W published a story about the first collaboration. I had known Dakis from years before. How it came to Barneys is after 6 years, Dakis said to me, what about Barney's windows? We have 5. And Dakis thought that was a great idea. And that was, we've been working on the installation idea from starting, 9 months ago. We had to plan thinking about how this was going to work.
It's about the connection of the inside of the store, which is very commercial, and the outside, which is the street. That's where the interaction is really, it's that gray zone between the store and the street.
It totally fits into the DNA of Barneys, which has to do with creativity, going way back to the beginning with the Pressmans and working with Corinne Day and Stephen Meisel. My sort of thinking is, how do we carry forward that DNA and relate it to the world we live in, which for me means connecting to so many avenues of our culture. This was very carefully timed, this window. This is the time where it's not a commercial season. Every store is their sales. So it gives us a chance to explore without any connection necessarily to commercial interests. We can really be totally free in this time period. I don't think there's any other art collector who would have dived into fashion in the way that Dakis did. And I have to say, Dakis is, everyone knows the collection, the seriousness of the collection, the extraordinary quality of the connection. For Dakis to enter into this arena means a great deal.
It's really up to the individual, to the curator, to decide what she or he will do. So, for instance, they literally chose the 5 pieces and they interpreted every piece with a drawing. On the contrary, Helmut Lang chose 5 pieces, but instead of interpreting those 5 pieces, he made a sculpture with the front row, which his own sculpture, which can add significance about, the fashion shows and the priorities where people are seated and so on and so forth.
That's the main interest in bringing it to Barneys. Now they are dealing with a particular space. It's 6 feet by 15 feet by 10 feet. It's open to the public. There's a window, people pass by. So it actually presented to each one of them another open-ended challenge. They could have just done nothing. That would have been fine. And actually, Juergen's probably a good example of how it translated to our windows. Juergen obviously made photographs of the clothes that he chose. But when we came to this installation, it was not about showing photographs in a window. How do you take that project and then make a piece for here? And we came up with the idea of hurricane cladding the whole building, the whole window, and making swipes of, in this case, one image from all of his choices. So it became a piece about covering the building, no window, you don't see a window, you only see Yves Saint Laurent 12 feet high. And that represented for him the most important element because of the year that Saint Laurent died. If you approach Helmut Lang, he has a history. He's somebody who you are interested to see how he is going to approach this subject. He chose a dress worn by Louise Bourgeois, her own. She happened to die that year. He was a very good friend of hers. Only Helmut Lang would bring Louise Bourgeois into the project. And he also chose the Alaya belt that Michelle Obama wore. And he chose it for a lot of reasons, not because it was Alaya. It was what it signified. The First Lady of America wearing an Alaya belt, a French designer, very, very esoteric to most of America. And then Helmut took it even farther and started to examine the hierarchy of the front row. Now, that's not what any other curator would have done because it's his history.
Curators we choose, whether they're artists or poets or whatever, we don't ask them to do fashion. We ask them to do artworks. They are not fashion. The fashion is what they have chosen and what inspired them to do these artworks. So there are two distinct things, and that's important to understand, and that's what makes this collection a kind of, I think, particular and interesting for me, is because of this very clear distinction.
That, for me, is why this was an extraordinary opportunity for Barneys to collaborate with Dakis on this project for exactly what he said. There's so much discussion and I think appropriation, superficially, of art by fashion houses. And I think for Barneys, it was an opportunity to treat this in the way that we are. We are in no way saying, making the point that art and fashion are the same thing. We're trying to show, as Dakis said, these pieces are not appropriating fashion. They're not, what they're doing is they're just, that's this, the subject that they're relating to, but the pieces have no qualifications. Like, as I said, they could have just said no and left the window empty. We would have said fine. So I think it was an opportunity for us to define a little bit how we, as a brand, approach this subject.